Hey everybody, welcome back to another video response. This time we're going to respond to a video released by the London School of Economics. Parent faculty at their sociology department were all asked the question, why sociology tends to lean left-wing. Now these faculty members attempt to answer this question. They don't really answer it though. Well, not directly. The answer that they think they give isn't really the answer. The true answer to the question why there are no right-wing sociologists is only implied in their answers. In other words, their direct answers reveal huge blind spots, and in those blind spots is the real reason there aren't any right-wing sociologists.
I wouldn't say there are no right-wing sociologists.
I'm sure there are.
And here we already have an issue with how they think. Well, I wouldn't say there aren't any right-wing sociologists. Yeah, nobody's saying there aren't any right-wing sociologists. But the field tends to lean left-wing, so already you're showing an epistemological flaw in your thinking. Generalizations are important. It's another way of saying abstractions. Abstractions are important. We look at the data and we find patterns in the data. That's all it is. Pattern recognition, which is necessary for thinking. The not all X fallacy. And you can see, the way that she's smiling, she's already a little bit uncomfortable with this issue. But she wouldn't be uncomfortable with this issue if she had a direct answer. Continuing.
I think that it's just probably a selection effect of the people that go into the discipline.
Yep, there's a selection pressure. You got that answer right on the test, but why is that?
Our work looks to challenge and unearth inequalities that are in areas that are often considered to be functioning healthily or operating meritocratically, and that is a sort of crucial part of sort of how I see sociology as being able to sort of take apart taken for granted notions of how the world is, where it plays that function, which is only one function that it has to play. It perhaps is therefore sort of acting as a critical left wing, instrument in a sort of society which is perhaps somewhat conservative in that regard. Sociology might look very different if we were living in a communist society, if you see what I mean.
Can you feel the pain this guy's going through trying to do his own thinking and not simply looking at associations and correlations? Can you see how he just doesn't do this that often? This is what I look like when I'm trying to make tasting notes in a wine or a beer. My brain doesn't do that often. I don't fire those synapses that often. It just makes me tired, and I do the eye close, and I look exhausted. But this is this guy's field. And he's just struggling to put the words together. All he's saying, hey, we think certain parts of society are based on merit. Actually, they're based on the structure of that part of society. It has nothing to do with the merit of the individual who advances. That's all he had to say. You can often tell somebody's understanding of a subject or an issue or a topic by how well they can explain the fundamental premise of that issue, topic, subject. Which this guy clearly didn't do. You know how to tell a good therapist from a bad therapist is simply ask them what makes a good therapist. And if they answer like this guy, doing the eyes closed, I can't quite, this is so difficult, why did I get this haircut kind of look, then they're probably a bad therapist. Continuing.
In one sense, there's an epistemological reason, which is that sociologists begin with the premise that we are social creatures.
Nope, that's not true. This is the head of the department. He's not true. Nobody disagrees that we're social creatures. Your whole life, your whole work is based on a straw man. Nobody thinks that. And that's not what sociology is based on. We're going to get to what sociology is based on here after this guy's done talking, but let me just say that's not what sociology is based on. Guys, you got to think about what you're doing. Otherwise, you could waste 30, 40 years. But if you don't do that, then at least surround yourself with other people who don't think about what they're doing. create a fiat industry around it. Call yourself the London School of Economics, so at least everybody thinks you're smart. Yeah, if you can't think about what you're doing, at least make other people think that you know what you're talking about. At least surround yourself with badges and high honors and distinctions so other people think that you know what you're talking about. Continuing.
I think one of the questions that we have to ask now is, what does it mean to be right-wing and what does it mean to be left-wing?
Hey, that's actually a pretty good point. Let's get to definitions. Thank you, Socrates. Right-wing, I think, now at least, is a little bit more obscure what the definition is. But I think psychologically, this is what we're into. Sociology is part of psychology. Psychologically, left-wing means your identity is created by society and the structures in which you live. Right-wing would mean your identity is created by your own choices. All right, continuing.
Generally, on the left, you'll often find accounts of the world that emphasize structure and social process. And on the right, you'll find accounts of the world that emphasize freedom of choice and agency.
Hey, yeah, that's what I just said. Good definition. Credit where credit's due. Continuing.
Often, of course, from the left, one would say that that's a mirage, that what looks like freedom of choice isn't freedom of choice at all. I mean, classically, just to give you an example, studies of elites show that those that are in the most powerful positions in society will often argue that the reason they're there is because of their own individual virtuosity and their own individual skill and talent. And they're unable to see that the reason why they're in their position is often because they were born in a particular place and they've had particular opportunities, all of which are down to the social structure that they've moved in. And so, yes, I mean, clearly, if the critique of their position or by pointing out that their position is down to social structure is left, then yes, a lot of sociology will be left-leaning, but not because of some sort of political bias, just because of the way that we think.
And this is a great example of what sociology does, and I'm really glad that he used it. So that our individual choices don't create where we are in society. It's actually the structure of society. But who creates the structure of society? Somebody does. Some group of people does. So the implicit premise of sociology ends up being individuals are not conscious. Individuals do not have agency, but groups do. Individuals cannot create their identity, but groups can create your identity. Somebody's creating your identity somewhere. Somebody's deciding where you end up in society. It's at some point. It's not you, it's other people. This is the fallacy. I know, logical fallacies, they're not cool. They're not going to win any argument. But sociology, as we can clearly see here, is based on this fallacy, reaffirmation through denial. In order to deny that something exists, you must affirm that it exists. This goes back to Aristotle. Nobody says society can't influence you. Nobody says you can't incentivize people in general to go in certain directions, but when it comes to the creation of your identity, it's going to come down to some decision. It can be your decision or it can be to somebody else's decision. Another blind spot in this, the blind spot of this video that we teased at, this guy seems to think that sociology was created out of the thin air. That we looked out at society and thought, maybe people are where they are because of how society structures not any choices or decisions that they make. But that's not what happened at all. First, there was a philosophy in place for at least 200 years prior to the invention of sociology. There was a philosophy in place that said, man's mind is ineffective. It cannot deal with reality correctly. The only way to get any proper interpretation of reality is through the group. It's through other people. 50 million Frenchmen can't be wrong. And sociology was based on that philosophy. Sociology was based on the preconceived notion that man's mind is ultimately ineffectual in this world. So if man's mind isn't effective, something else must be effective. We're just going to place the responsibility on groups. And this exposes another logical fallacy. I know, again, this isn't very cool, but if you just push the responsibility back to groups, not the individual, it doesn't answer the question. Now you have to ask, where does the group's choice, where does the structure of psychology come from? at a certain point, you have to get back to an individual's decision at some point. Okay, so let's investigate how we make decisions, why we make decisions, how we can make decisions that are less influenced by the perhaps nefarious influences of society or other people in general. That would be a much better question for sociology or just psychology to go to in general. But I think that may require a level of abstraction, a level of philosophy that these guys at the London School of Economics may not be ready to handle, especially that one guy with the haircut.